Come on in. Welcome to my studio. My name's Jay Piscopo, and I am a writer and comic book artist, and I work on the Undersea Adventures of Captain Eli, and a new book that's coming out in January through Diamond Distributors called The Sea Ghost. Usually there's variant covers out there, so I thought instead of having to buy several comics to get two different covers, here you got one comic with two covers. The original book that it spawned from, The Undersea Adventures of Captain Eli, #1, and The Undersea Adventures of Captain Eli, #2. This is where it's created. I do everything digitally, but I also work on paper as well. You can see right here, this is my drawing board. This is a chapter from the third book, and I will sit in what I call the quiet room and basically work out a story, bits and pieces of dialogue, different images, and then sit down here at the computer and pin the pieces up and work directly off the computer and create it. Yes, we are a mom and pop operation, very small. There's all our books, and also we have Commander X action figures, which Dr. Mego, who is Paul Clark, and he's basically the guy who's responsible for bringing back Megos to popularity. And then all his different variants. And this variant is called the Barbary Knight. One of the influences on Commander X is the movie star Errol Flynn, as you can see with that little mustache, and this really gets that across, and then that's ready to go. Let me show you a bit about who I am and where a lot of my ideas come from that go into Captain Eli. This is what I like to call the Vault. It is basically a collection of movies and action figures and comic books and artwork and little bits and pieces of things I picked up over the years at different comic book conventions, yard sales. And check out all these more Megos right up here. These are different variations of Captain Eli. Actually, that's a prototype of Captain Eli, and as well variations of Commander X. I love Westerns. This whole wall is dedicated to Westerns, science fiction, war, and historical stuff. I love anime and Japanese animation as well as old animation, particularly Hanna-Barbera animation from the 60s. And that's what a lot of people will see in Sea Ghost and Captain Eli. You can see my style is very derivative of that. And one of the things I'm trying to do is create a comic book that actually reads like an old television show. Superheroes seem to be the coin of the realm. So the whole thing I want to do is to create a very interesting superhero in a one-shot that brought you into Eli's world and some idea of what the universe was like. And then, if you were interested, there's 2 graphic novels waiting for you and a 3rd on the way.
In his first solo adventure, the Sea Ghost discovers a dangerous secret when a mysterious sphere transports him to an alien world locked in an endless war. Can he convince the Seamus and the Flan to stop fighting and unite against the real enemy? Find out in The Sea Ghost #1, The Sea Ghost in the Machine.
When I grew up with comics, they looked a lot like this. This was like one of my favorites. Every time something had 100 pages for 60 cents, I went crazy. And these were usually full of reprints, but also had original stories in the beginning or at the end. And what I loved about comics from this period, I think why it's kind of interesting, if you look at today's market, what's interesting to me is that comics, the people creating comics knew that kids were reading them, but they also knew adults were reading them too. When people hear that term all ages, they think it's just for kids. It really isn't. A lot of the creators who are creating all ages books are trying to recreate the same kind of fun they had when they were kids. The difference is we're not just trying to make a pastiche here. We want to create something new as well, and something interesting. And that's why going back and looking at the classics, Flash Gordon, things like that, old movie serials, and finding what was fun about them and reworking it for today's audience is what it's all about. But right now we're going to go and talk to Rick Lowell at Casablanca Comics, and we're going to talk about the comic book market as it is, and talk about Captain Eli and how that can fit into that. So let's go. We are here in the beautiful Old Port section of downtown Portland. This is my hometown, and I love this town. And we are here at Casablanca Comics, and we're going to take a walk inside and talk to Rick Lowell and talk about the comic book industry, take a look at his store, and talk about Captain Eli as well. Here we are at Casablanca Comics. It's one of the greatest comic book stores in the entire world. It's owned by Rick Lowell, and we're going to talk to him for a few minutes. Come on over here for a sec. Rick, how you doing?
Good. Good to see you, Jay.
Good to see you, too. Listen, I just want to ask you a few questions about the comic book market.
Sure.
How do you see the comic book market in terms of demographics right now? Like, who are reading comic books the most?
Well, the thing is, everybody's reading comics, and that's what people have to understand. It's not just a kids market. It's not just an adults market. It's everything. But we're seeing a lot of families reading books, and a lot of parents who had been reading books on their own are, introducing it to their kids. A lot of kids are being introduced because of all the various movies and cartoons. But then there are people that have been doing it for 40, 50 years that never stopped. And, they love stuff that's been around for 40 or 50 years. So there's just a wide variety of material reading comics at this point.
How do you see the market now, though, in terms of, realistically, in terms of the number of people reading comics to what it used to, let's say, 10 years ago?
I think right now we see more people reading comics than collecting comics. I think 10 years ago people were collecting and not necessarily reading, and now I think we have a lot of people who are just reading the books, which is what we want. It used to be, I think the thought was that, people read comics for 5 or 10 years and then stopped, but the reality is they don't stop. So as they're getting older, the material's getting older.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that there isn't a younger generation coming in. So there's still that need for the younger material. It's just that the people who've grown up older with it have created material that suits them. So there really needs to be material for every segment of the market.
Yeah, and right now there is, I don't feel that there is as much of that. One of the things I saw recently was Marvel created Thor, the Mighty Avenger.
Right,
amazing book, incredible book. It's an all ages book, and it's got canceled.
Yep. And, one of the problems with a lot of the comics that are going on today, there is not an easy jumping on point. Or if you're jumping in the middle of a story. And books like Thor is an example where you could just read a self-contained story,
yes,
and get the enjoyment out of a single issue. That's definitely something that the market needs at this point.
And in terms of marketing to the audience, do you feel that older readers and kids are a lot easier to market to than, say, I would say the mainstream audience of comics today?
I think so, because they really want to know what's out there, and I think maybe that middle audience is going to seek it out on their own, and they don't want people to tell them what's out there. They want to find it.
Yes.
Whereas maybe someone who's older or younger needs to have it introduced to them.
Great.
Yeah.
Now, if you take a look here, we got Captain Eli and Commander X. These are our two major characters in the Captain Eli saga. What's interesting to me is I believe this is your demographic. This is the older comic book reader. This is someone who grew up with Silver Age comics, aware of Golden Age comics, and loves a good old yarn and loves superheroes and is still reading comics. And no matter where the comic book industry goes, those hardcore readers are always going to be there. Speaking of Johnny Quest cartoons, here's Captain Eli. This is the other part of the demographic, kids. Kids who just want to read comic books. Think about how old you were when you first pick up your first comic book and what about that comic book amazed you and made you want to read comic books for the rest of your life. That's what Captain Eli is all about. Why don't you come over here for a second. Here's Seaghost. Now, the whole idea with Seaghost is to create a superhero for all time. Superheroes are the coin of the realm in comic books, so creating the next new superheroes was important. And I love Aquaman and Submariner, and I wanted to create a character, and of course you can see some Space Ghost influence here. I wanted to create a character of that caliber, of that strength. The Seaghost book is here marketed with all the new books that came out this month, as well as a lot of all-ages books as well. But what's kind of cool about the book, we have two covers, so you can market it both ways. You can put it right here on the rack with the rest of the comics, as well as putting it in the kids' stuff. Now, the whole purpose of Seaghost is a gateway to bring you into Captain Eli's world. Rick, tell me a little bit about how Captain Eli is received here in the store.
Oh, the wonderful thing is, first off, when you did the introductory comic that we could hand out to kids, we would hand that out to new readers or any kid that had come into the store for the first time who had never read a comic. That's something we'd give them, and they just love it. And they'd come back, and then they'd want the graphic novel, and then they'd come back for the second one, and now we have this whole large group of kids and families who keep coming in saying, when's the next one coming out? It's funny, sometimes we'll give, the kids the comic to read, and they just plop right down and start reading it on the spot. Parents who have younger children who aren't really reading well on their own, but they want a good, clear story that they can teach them. The parents will read it with the book, and you read the book with the kids. But obviously, it's something kids can read on their own, or adults. But it's something that it can be shared as a family experience.
The book itself.
I think the value of the book is great because you have a full color graphic novel for under $10, which is just amazing. I mean, it's a great price point. A lot of times you'll see independently produced graphic novels that are $15, $20 that are in black and white that you can't really sell to families anyway.
So, Rick, thank you so
You're
much.
welcome. Good to
cool.
talk to you,
Good
Jay.
talking to you too.
Retailers, check out the Seaghost One Shot as well as both Captain Eli graphic novels in January previews.